But you are scheduled to take your constructed response final this Thursday. It was supposed to be tomorrow, but since you guys were behind about a day, moved it to Thursday so that you had adequate time to attempt the practice part and, go over the answers. So Thursday is when we're taking that portion. And that's the portion that I honestly get excited about because the past 3 years, we did not have that as part of our final. And so I would always warn my students that, because honestly, scoring high on the other part of your final, even though we give you the review and all that stuff, it usually isn't great. So for the past 3 years, I've always told my students, prepare for it to bring your grade down. Like make your current grade as high as you possibly can, so that when you go to finals, that you'll still at least keep your letter grade, is what I used to tell my students. Now that we have this constructed response portion, I've actually seen some students' grades improve, because there is some extra credit attached to that. So let's talk about that in case you forgot, because we didn't do this first semester too. But it says that you're only required to do one question from each unit, but I'm telling you right now, do both. Attempt both. Even if you can only do part of it, great. You can get some extra credit that way. So I'll also have unit 3 on there, but it'll be optional and extra credit because I know some algebra teachers didn't bother with that one, and I get it, like there was a lot of stuff this year, but I taught it to you guys, so I'm going to offer it to you as optional and as extra credit should you get it right. So yeah, that's the one you just quizzed on Friday and or yesterday. Yes.
So if we do, if we get one right, and we'll read the right one.
So I'll get to that. Guys, I just need you to listen. I will probably answer your questions, and then if not, then I'll ask you if you still have questions. But yeah, so doing the extra credit will help you, it will not hurt you. And also you are allowed to use a 3x5 inch index card as a cheat sheet, but you have to turn it in when you're done testing. So including on the constructed response day, you have to turn it in. So yeah, make sure that if you want the extra help, that you could use that as a tool. And the review is modeled after the actual test, just with different numbers. So literally, that's why one of the questions says, a car was originally sold for, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, after 4 years, how much is the phone worth? Because literally all we do is make a copy and change a few things. Whoever changed this forgot to change this car, that's it. But yeah, that's really all we do is change some of the numbers. And maybe sometimes the names or the situation. But if you can do and understand everything that's on this, then there's no reason you can't get the extra credit. So the way that I grade it, so there's 3 units and then there's going to be that unit 3, but there's 3 units that I have to hold you responsible for. And it'll be out of 10 points each unit. Now, if you do both questions, so really there's a total of 3 units. I'm just not going to be able to write it on the screen. So I'll write it up here. So it's out of 30 points, the whole thing. Whatever you get right, I'm putting it out of 30. So if you get like both of these questions completely right, then for that section, you get a 20 out of 30. If you get half of this question right and half of that question right, then you still get a 10 out of 10 for that section. Does that make sense? So if you do unit 5, 6, and 7, all of it, and you get it completely right, you can get up to a 60 out of 30. That's a 200% on that portion. And then you have that unit 3. That will be optional and extra credit. So if you get both parts of unit 3 completely right, that's an extra 20 points, all still out of 30. So get it all perfectly right, that's even more than 200%. So last semester we did this, granted the highest score you could get was a 60 out of 30 last semester. And I did have some students that maybe they were at a high F. I saw them go from a high F to a C. Not even kidding. God bless you. Off of doing the extra credit and getting a good majority of it right. So I'm not guaranteeing you anything, but I'm telling you, to give yourself the best chance, you need to be taking this seriously. Don't just copy your friend or copy the answers. Like really sit down, try to understand it, make a note card, transfer all the stuff onto that note card. One of my teachers in the past taught me how to make 3 by 5 inches in Microsoft Word and type in really small font and all that stuff. And gave it to you in the note card. Yes.
So if we, like, say like, get like, we fail the multiple choice, but we get like 100, 200 on the district response. Will that, how will that affect 100?
So the multiple choice part is also gonna be worth 30 points, like I make them worth the same amount, so you can only get extra credit on the executive response portion. So say you get all the extra credit. And then you score 0 out of 30 on your multiple choice. Well, then out of 60 points, you still have a 60, but you still get 100% in that category. That make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, granted, I'm sure you could get at least one of them right on the multiple choice, so I imagine there might be quite a few students that have over 100% in that category, and it's like, it bleeds into the other categories. So yeah, it's just 10%, but if you get like a 200%, then that's like 20%, does that make sense? Okay. So now, after talking about that, what questions do you have from the review still? Okay, the first one, like unit 5, the first choice or second choice? Okay, so it's right there. A car that was originally sold for $18,000 loses 1/5 of its value each year after it was bought. After 4 years, how much is the car worth? And then write the equation for the value of the car 50 years after it is released. So really, I think that these two questions should be flipped, because I feel like you need the equation before you can figure this part out. So can someone remind me, and table 5, please stop. Can someone remind me what unit 5 was about? Exponential functions. We make a note of that. So that was like the first thing we covered this semester, but really important. Exponential functions, what's the most basic equation that you can have for exponential functions? Y equals A B to the X power. Plain close it. What does the A stand for? That's fine. Now I'm gonna be honest then. Yeah, so A stands for initial amount. B stands for what? So the rate that it's changing by, but I'm gonna call it common ratio because I don't want you to think like, okay, if it's 20% rate or something like that. I don't want you to just put 0.20. Right, but B would be your common ratio. And X would be your what?
Or time.
Time. So then make the equation. What's my initial amount in this problem? 18,000. What am I multiplying by each time to figure out its value? So I'm hearing 1/5 and then I'm hearing 4/5 essentially. Now, there's 2 ways to figure out its value, but in this equation, it only wants you to multiply. So we've talked about this before. What is its value after 1 year? You're telling me after 1 year it's $3,600?
No, that's how much you like take off there.
So that's what, so the 3,600 is 1/5 of that value. Okay, so then to figure out what it's worth after,
14,000.
to figure out what it's worth after 1 year, you subtract it, right? And you figure out that it's this after 1 year. Now, instead of doing that each time, because you have to multiply it by 1/5 each time and then subtract it, You could just do this instead. If it's losing 1/5 of its value, how much of its value is it keeping?
Four to.
So what you could do is multiply it by 4/5. Try that in your calculator. Does it give you this after 1 year? Yes. And if you don't believe me, try it out. I honestly didn't know that before this year. Like anytime I was trying to figure out what 20% off of something was, I was timesing it by 0.2 and then subtracting it. When really I could just multiply it by 0.8 and then it gives me that value.
Well,
Wild. So anyway, that's what your B is. It's 4/5, but that's what you can multiply by each time to get the current value each year. But if I want to just do it one time, I will put it to the T power or to the X power, whatever you want to call it. So that way I can just plug in the year. And then if it wants it in function notation, then we could do C of T for car, not T. So that would be the answer for part 2. So then for part 1, what do I have to do? Write the same equation, but we're plugging in for the T. So then C of 4, because that's my time frame that we're trying to figure out, is 18,000 times 4/5 to the 4th power. If I were you, I'd put that all into the calculator, or we could try to do it by hand, because that's how people make mistakes. I put C instead of P. So here's my equation, that'll help me figure it out. What its value is in 4 years. I wrote it in function notation, so I'm showing you that I plugged in 4 into this equation. For the T. So this is just notation on the left, this is that side alone. On the right, I could put that all in the calculator. And here's what it'll look like. All right, so 18,000 fraction should go in parentheses like that, 4/5 to the 4th power, like that. So then it gives me this as my answer. My answer is talking about money, so we should make it look like money. What would it be as money? Good. And then that's my answer for after 4 years, that's how much it's worth. Questions on that? Okay, so key thing there, multiply it by the value it's keeping versus the value it's losing. All right, any other questions from any other parts?
Number 1 on unit 7.
Okay, number 1 on unit 7, that's a good one to go over. I know you guys don't like dealing with fractions, but literally every single operation that requires you doing something with fractions, you could do in the calculator. Well, I'll show you that. But unit 7, what was that about?
Quadratic function.
Quadratic functions, solving them specifically, but yeah, quadratic functions. And in the first one, it specifically asks you to solve it by completing the square. So in order for you to get the full points, you need to do it by completing the square. If you have no clue and you forgot to make a note card or something, solve it by another way and I'll give you at least half the points and show all your work. But to get the full points, you need to do the completing the square steps. So what's the first step in completing the square? Rewrite it into what? Okay, that is true. So for completing the square, it's the only one that wants the C alone on one side. So I kind of think of it like it starts with the C, completing the square, remove the C. How do you cancel this 5/36? Good, whatever you do on one side of the equal sign. Good, same thing you would do if it was a whole number. So just treat it like that. So this is what I have after step 1. What's step 2?
Take half.
take half of B, square it, then add to both sides. So this would be a great set of things to put on your note card. So take half of B, square it, then add to both sides. So completing the square had those like super specific steps, if you remember. As long as you follow them, you should be good. What is my B in this one? It should always only be a number.
It's sort of negative.
So what's half of -1?
Wait.
You are right. I am going to use the fraction though, because we have fractions in the problem, so we don't do decimals until the very end if you need to. So we took half of B, half of -1 is -1/2. We're gonna square it. What is that squared?
1/4.
It is 1/4. No, you could put that in your calculator and it'll tell you that. You would just have to type it in probably like this, press these button. Right, but then it will tell you that and then press the fraction to decimal button. Sorry, that could be a Alright, so there's that, and so it's the 1/4 that we're adding to both sides. We took half of B, we squared it, now we're adding it to both sides. Why, you might ask? Well, it makes a perfect square trinomial on the left. On the right, we do it just because that's the rule, you have to do it to both sides. So here's how it would look in your calculator. -5/36. Plus 1/4. Okay, so I didn't have to memorize any fraction rules for that. I just have to type it in with parentheses around the fractions, press this button, and it gives me my simplified fraction. So on the right side is 1/9. Question so far? No. Okay, so we made a perfect square trinomial on the left. What do we do now? We factor it. So on the left side, you factor it. I can tell you it always ends up being whatever half of B was, which was -1/2. Just so you know. But I'll still show you the diamond method anyway. But yeah, so if you factor it, it's 1/4 on the top, -1 on the bottom. See if your half of B works. It should. So it's -1/2. Does that multiply to 1/4 and add to -1?
Yes.
So that's why this might be sometimes a preferred method. Everyone see that? Okay, so it's always whatever half of B was for your perfect square. The right side is still 1/9. Okay, so that's step 3, you factor it. Do you remember step 4? Good, isolate X. How do you do that? Opposite of squaring is whatever you do on one side. So I get X minus 1/2. This you could put in your calculator. I'll tell you right now, it's plus or minus 1/3. You have to remember the plus or minus though. Anytime you square a root, it's a plus or minus. And then opposite of minusing 1/2 is whatever you do on one side. And that's how you get the 2 solutions, which they told you what the 2 solutions would be. They said they'd be 1/6 and 5/6. And that's from the positive 1/3 plus 1/2 and the negative 1/3 plus 1/2. If you have to resubmit, you'll have to do it in school, but there's that one. Questions?